Bold predictions, chapter 29. Congratulations on the doorstep of 30. I told Pat Foley we were going to make it to 30, and we're going to make it to 30. But let's get through 29 first. These are the things you believe, or at least you claim you believe, and you would bet your own hard-earned money on. And hey, this first one's not all that bold if I don't say so myself. Let's talk about Arkansas. Ryan from Royal, Arkansas. He says Arkansas will lead the country in rushing again this year. This is a 5, maybe a 5.5 for me. They've got the horses to do it. And they also lost a first-round NFL receiver, so logic would tell you they're even more likely to lean on that run game this year. Just an idea of how lethal this rushing attack was a year ago. They were over 100 yards on the ground in every game except the Georgia game, which was just an unmitigated disaster we don't even talk about. They were 200-plus yards on the ground in 9 of their 13 games last year. 227 yards per game. Jesse found this stat earlier today with his 2 good hamstrings. They had 4 players on this roster last year with 500 or more yards and 5 or more touchdowns. And not all of them left. And so they got a lot of them back. KJ Jefferson, the quarterback, of course, back. They got Dom Johnson there, Raheem Sanders, A.J. Green. So I think absolutely the rushing numbers are going to be there. I'll tell you what could get in the way here. I don't think it's a philosophical change because it's the same quarterback here, same coordinator, same everything. I think that maybe the schedule being as difficult as it is, that may be what keeps them down. They've got to play Cincinnati week 1. That's not a team that you're probably hanging 275 plus on the ground on. They've got A&M, Alabama, at Mississippi State, at Brigham Young, at Auburn, LSU. You know, it's just there are a lot of really good defensive teams here, a lot of really good run-stopping defensive fronts that you see. So that may be what stops them. And I want to remind you, when I talk about the best rushing attacks in college football, I always remove the service academy teams and put them on a different level because they're running different offenses. They're running option-based offenses. So we're talking about non-option-based teams. So no Air Force, no Army. Outside of those teams, yeah, Arkansas very well could be up there again. Next up, let's talk about the Big 12 championship game. Is there a person out there, by the way, who has not picked Kansas State as their sleeper this year? Everybody. It's not a sleeper if everyone's picking them. Just want to remind you of that. So football enjoyer, here's his bold prediction. The Big 12 title game will be Kansas State versus someone not named Oklahoma or Texas. This is a 9.5. Every one of those things individually sound like they could happen. Angels in the outfield, flap those wings. It could happen. Yes. Will it happen all at once? No, probably not. But let's entertain it just for our purposes. The odds to win the Big 12 right now. Oklahoma is the favorite. Texas right there behind him. Oklahoma State 3rd, Baylor 4th. Kansas State is a distant 5th. Their odds now are plus 1,200. Now, in a vacuum, that doesn't mean much to you. But to give you an idea of how much America has slobbered all over Kansas State in the futures market, May 30th, you could have gotten Kansas State to win the Big 12 at plus 2,500. Those odds have come all the way down to plus 1,200, which means, we've got elderly grandmothers who have never bet college football before out there putting money on Kansas State to take home the Big 12. Where's the conference? I don't know. What city do they play in? I don't know. What's the color scheme? No idea. But I love Deuce Vaughn. Give me Kansas State. You saw the odds there, so let's take a look at their schedule. They have to go to Oklahoma pretty early in the year. It's not that I doubt the team. I find it suspicious that everyone has honed in on the same sleeper, as I was guilty of last year with Iowa State. I remember that. And I'm not being hypocritical. I remember my fault. I'm just trying to caution everyone not to go down the road I went down. They got Texas at home late in the year. They go to Baylor, which I think is, especially late in the season, right there before you go right the next week to West Virginia, a very tough back-to-back road stretch. You've got to have them in the Big 12 title game, and then you got to have neither Oklahoma nor Texas, the 2 favorites to win the conference in the title game. They're the only teams, Texas and OU, in the conference with an over-under win total of 9 or more. Kansas State's over-under win total is 7 by comparison. It's unrealistic. So it's a 9.5 for me on the boldness scale. Next up, Ohio State, this is the talking point. It's one of the biggest talking points of college football this year. And Joshua, love the name, he says Ohio State's going to have a top 10 defense this year in year one under Jim Knowles. They go undefeated in the regular season from Lima, Ohio. I'm just going to focus on the top 10 defense part. This is a 7. I think that's a very safe boldness rating, a 7. It is the stated goal of Ryan Day this year to have a top 10 defense. He went and hired Jim Knowles from Oklahoma State for this very reason. Producer Jesse and Colin, they are showing you the ineptitude defensively last year. Yards per game allowed, 59th in the country. Points per game allowed, 38th in the country. By comparison, Jim Knowles at Oklahoma State, they were top 10 in both of those categories last year, among several others. So it's not very hard to figure out why Ryan Day saw fit to bring him in. But then you start to look at something else with Ohio State, which should give you a lot of confidence. It's called a schedule. And when you look at Ohio State's schedule, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but if you're watching on YouTube, or even if you're driving around listening on podcast, you can pretty well imagine who they play. Add Notre Dame and Arkansas State and Toledo. You know who they play. Where's the quarterback who really scares you? You know, if you're fundamentally sound defensively, they've got 13 defensive prospects that have ranked in the top 150 in recruiting since 2019. Talent's not the issue here. Where's the quarterback that terrifies you? Now, conversely, if you don't play fundamentally sound, if your secondary is a train wreck like it was last year, then it doesn't even matter. Even Michigan can throw the ball all over you. You know, there are several quarterbacks on this schedule that'd be able to throw the ball all over you. You may go to Maryland and give up 35 offensive points if you had the kind of defensive ineptitude you had last year. I don't think they'll have that. The question is not will they improve. I would bet my last dollar, yeah, they're going to improve quantum leaps. Is it going to be quantum enough to get inside the top 10 in the defensive metrics? I don't know if it's going to be quite that big a springboard this year. The good news is it doesn't have to be. If you promise me Ohio State's going to have the 19th best defense in the country this year, I think they'd be playing for a national championship. So if you just get me, Jim, Mr. Knowles, Jimothy, can I call you Jimothy? Just get me in the top 20. The top 10, we can worry about that in 2023. You don't tell Ryan Day I said this, but 19th, 17th, it's going to be plenty good enough for us this year. We got a guy named C.J. Stroud, and he's throwing to guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba. Some people, by the way, around Buckeye water coolers, think Marvin Harrison Jr. will end up being the better receiver. And look, if you're right, that means Smith and Jigba could be like a top 10 draft pick and still not be the highest taken draft pick in that receiver room, which is kind of an ongoing theme for them now. So Jim Knowles, yes, he's got a chore on his hands. He doesn't have a bare cupboard. I think they'll be a top 20 defense. But top 10, I put that one at a 7. Not out of the realm of possibility, but it's bold enough to make the segment. Next up, this one is a significant amount bolder, I think. Nate said, Iowa, the Hawkeyes, they're going to win 10 games again and win the Big Ten this year. I made this one an 8.5. Wait a second, I didn't even notice the last part. They're going to win the Big Ten. Okay, that's a 9.25. Just on the fly change there, 9.25. I don't know why we have to add these addendums, but we do. So to win the Big Ten, yeah, you're going to have double-digit wins to even play for the title. But to win the Big Ten, yeah, that's a lofty ask of Iowa. You know why? You have to have good quarterback play. By default, no matter who you play from the other division, you're going to have really good quarterback play. They don't have that. This is a bad offense. It was a bad offense last year, and special teams and opportunistic defense won them some games. It is not a duplicable formula. I know people kept saying that last year, me included, and I know Iowa kept proving them wrong. We're talking about a different standard here. Their over-under win total is 7.5. To be clear, the prediction is they win the West, they win the Big Ten. To do that, you don't special teams and defense your way to those metrics, to check in those boxes. You know, Spencer Petras or one of those guys up there competing, they've got to actually go win games for you. I don't think Iowa's equipped to win games. Now, having said that, you know, if we were to talk about them winning the division and winning 8 or 9 games, well, that's a different reality and one that I could get on board with because I think they'll have a really good team this year. I could very well be up there for that Michigan game. But the other thing to keep in mind here is they draw Ohio State and Michigan from the East. They play Michigan October 1st. They go to Ohio State a couple of weeks later on October 22nd. They play them both in the same month. They wrap up with Wisconsin, at Minnesota, Nebraska. They got Purdue in November too, so it's not the easiest. It's not the easiest November. I think all those games are in Division 2. Look, I can get on board if you want to go 8 wins and they win the division. Although that'll be tough too, just because of the schedule draw. But going beyond that, that's really hard for me to get my hands around. Lastly, I put a 9 on this one, 9 on the boldness scale. Justin said Alabama's going to lose to both the Texas teams they play. There are point spreads available on both of these games. Bama goes to Texas in week 2. They're favored by over 15 points. They play Texas A&M early October in Tuscaloosa. They're favored by a little over 2 touchdowns in that one. I think the current number is 14.5. So we've got numbers on both these games already. So it's highly unlikely that they outright lose either one of them, much less both of them. The matchup nightmare for Texas in week 2 cannot be overstated. You got a brand new offensive line, brand new quarterback facing the best pass rush we will have seen in college football in quite some time, in Will Anderson and Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. I mean, Pete Golding is committing FCC violations in Tuscaloosa earlier today at how excited he is to get his Dime Rabbits package on the field. That's how excited. They don't even care about offense, man. This is going to be one of those years with Bama where you get excited when the punt team goes out there because it may be more exciting to watch their defense than their offense, and they return a Heisman quarterback on that offense. So I know what I just said. It's just potentially a generational pass rush for them this year. But even having said that, I asked producer Jesse when he was doing his stats and info duties today, when has this happened? Because if A&M were to beat them, that would be back-to-back wins, obviously, in the regular season for a team over Nick Saban and Alabama. How often has it happened? I know we got a lot of Bama fans watching. Think to yourself. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. How many times has a team beaten Nick Saban's Alabama in back-to-back regular seasons? I think most of you remember one of them. Because one of them was Ole Miss in 2015 and 2016. Do you remember the other one? It's not been Auburn, hadn't been Georgia, not Florida. It has not been any other division opponent except the one down in Baton Rouge, 2010 and 2011. Les Miles and LSU beat Nick Saban in Alabama. The reason you forgot that is because Bama went right back and beat them in the national championship game that year and kind of erased all those memories. So 2 times it's happened. I do not necessarily expect this to be the third, but that's why they play the game. So Bold Predictions, Chapter 29, had a lot of boldness. We had multiple 9 or highers in this one, including that last one.